Welcome to everyone. We're really happy that you could all make it today. In Port Townsend, we are fortunate to live and work on the ancestral land and waters of the Slalom people, the Strong people, and many other Coast Salish peoples of the Salish Sea who have been stewards of this place since time immemorial. We respect and are grateful to them for their ongoing leadership to protect and restore our region's environment and its resources for future generations. Our speaker today is likely familiar to everyone. Lynda Mapes is an environmental journalist at the Seattle Times. Her work with teams at the Seattle Times and as an individual has been honored many times. She's, besides just being a great writer, people actually notice that she's a great writer, and she's been given numerous awards, including the 2012 American Association for the Advancement of Science Award, and in 2013-14, the Knight Fellowship in Science Journalism at MIT. You probably also know her books. I think this is number 6. So one of my favorites is Elwha, A River Reborn. Before that, there was Breaking Ground. After that, Witness Tree, and also Rescuing Rialto, a children's book that you can find in our gift shop. Her newest book, Orca, Shared Water, Shared Home, was published in June of this year by Braided River with the Seattle Times, and became the basis for a traveling exhibit that we are currently hosting, as is MAST in Des Moines. The exhibit is going to travel to other community marine centers in the Salish Sea over the next year. So in November, you can find it at Faro Marine Life Center in Port Angeles, and also at the Puget Sound Estuarium in Olympia. And then through the spring and summer, it will be at the Nisqually Reach Education Center, the Langley Whale Center, Harbor Wild Watch, and the Sea Discovery Center. So read the book, which is behind me, and come see the exhibit, and be on the lookout for an environmental journalist action figure, which is no doubt in the works. We look to Lynda Mapes for so many reasons, but the thoroughness of her research, the breadth of her resources, her willingness and effort to find all the pieces of the story, no matter how complex the story is, her passion for these stories, and underneath it all is just this ongoing sense of wonder. But we also really appreciate her ability to take a hard look at what's at stake, and to then show us and remind us why we need to be vigilant and why we need to find the will to take action while we still can. I've been looking forward to having Lynda in this series for about 3 years now, and this weekend with Orca Recovery Day and beluga in our midst, and I think Billy Collins says the awareness that the earth is busy with whales. It seems like the perfect day to welcome Lynda Mapes to be our speaker, and thank you so much, Lynda, for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. I really appreciate that introduction, and I'm just delighted to be here today. And thank you to the Port Townsend Marine Science Center for putting this on, and to all the marine science centers all over our region that bring the miracle of the Salish Sea and the oceans beyond and our freshwater world to all of us. It's a water planet. It's the blue planet. And for this, we can only be grateful, because without water, there would be no life. So here we all are on this beautiful Sunday. The precipitation season has started again. I know everyone is thrilled about that, just to have the rain back. Smells so good, feels so good, especially after the summer. We're here to talk about the southern resident killer whales. We call them the orcas. And, there's so much to say, and I really want to hear your questions. So I'm gonna get right into it here. Diane's gonna help me out by showing some slides as we talk. And then I'm going to end up with a video that I want to show you just because it's beautiful and fun. Southern resident orcas playing around in central Puget Sound one day when I was out on a research boat with Brad Hansen from NOAA Fisheries. So let's get into it. The title of today's talk is Status, Trends, and Solutions, but we're going to be a little more playful than that too. We're also going to talk about why should we care about the southern residents? Why do they matter? You know, it's true that there are orcas in every single ocean of the world. And in fact, there are three populations right here in the Northeastern Pacific. You have not only the southern residents, but they share space with the transients and the offshores and even the northern residents. So what is so special about the southern residents? We're going to talk about that too. Well, let's start with the basics. For anybody who hasn't yet been in to see the exhibit at the Port Townsend Marine Science Center, I hope you'll go, because go there, and if you don't catch it there, see it at the Mass Center in Des Moines or get it at the Seattle Aquarium. There are these fantastic graphics done by my colleague, Emily Eng, and amazing photos by my other colleague, Steve Bringman at the Seattle Times. We worked together for 18 months to do a series called Hostile Waters, on which this book is based. And it's all still online. It'll be up forever. I hope you'll look at it because there are a lot of really special features there, including some documentary films we made and so forth. The thing you need to know about the southern resident killer whales is their status is, I won't sugarcoat this, it's grim. There are only 73 left, 73. We know them as individuals. They each have names. That's never a good sign for wildlife. What you want is a population so numerous you couldn't hope to name it. But you also need to know that we could get there. We can get there. We've done this with other species. Gray whales are a perfect example. They were nearly extinct because of hunting. But the Marine Mammal Protection Act, enacted in '74, they're now recovered to a healthy population. So, you know, the southern residents, this is not some crybaby species. You know, they are the top predator, orcas, in every single ocean of the world. They can get it done as long as we create the possibility for them to survive. So their status, they were listed as an endangered species in 2005. I mentioned there are 73 southern residents today. That's in 3 pods, J, K, and L. That's about the lowest population since we started counting. We started counting them in 1973 and started keeping a record in '76. You know, back then there were about 68 whales, and that was after the capture era, in which we lost 40% of the population. They were literally taken away by captors and sold to aquariums all over the world. And about 40% of the southern resident population was either killed outright in the captures or they died later in captivity. There's only one left. One today, and she's still at the Miami Aquarium. Her name is Tokatai. She has the other names, and she's been at the Miami Aquarium since she was captured 51 years ago. And if you read my story in the Seattle Times yesterday, you know it's not going really well for her there, to put it mildly.
Linda?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know to tell us to advance slides?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Let's see a slide.
Okay.
Let's see a slide. Okay, that's a perfect one to start with. So this is Mother Orca Tahlequah. She's the whale who changed the conversation. This story started for me in 2018, and it began in a moment of crisis. At that time, this beautiful mother whale was carrying her baby calf, who she knew was not alive, but she refused to let it go. It had lived only 1/2 hour. You can see the little tiny fin right there midway down her body. The calf was perfectly formed. She carried it very carefully. She carried it for 17 days and 1,000 miles. I don't think she ever let it go, honestly. I think it finally just fell apart. And at the Seattle Times, we decided to stay with her throughout this journey that could only be interpreted as a journey of grief. And we wrote about her witness to that baby calf. Why? Well, to us, it was important for readers everywhere to understand that this was a mother who just happened to be a whale. That these are families. This isn't random black and white wildlife swimming around out there. These are family groups. They're very tight knit. They stay together for life. The kids never leave their parents lifelong. Imagine that. You know, we can't hardly get through a weekend together. They stick together for life. Very, very closely bonded. These families share language, they share culture. The right way to think about the Southern residents is this is an ancient society. And it's one of the oldest cultures in the animal world. These are also among the most intelligent animals in the animal world. They have much larger brain proportion to their body than most animals. And they have parts of their brain that are very, very complex, and parts of their brain we don't even know what they're for. All we know is we don't have it. The parts of their brain that are very large tend to be the part of the brain that has to do with empathy and relational skills, which makes a lot of sense. Here you have an animal that's lived in shared space, not only with its own intimate family members, but also with these other populations of orcas without conflict, without warfare, without harming one another. They don't have any of the kinds of conflict problems and self-destructive tendencies that humans do. They basically take care of one another. These families share food, and the females take turns taking care of the young. They're very, very physically affectionate. Anyone who's spent time with these animals on the water knows they're also very playful. They love to pitch themselves in the air, seemingly just for the joy of it. And I've seen them sculling along underwater on their backs, I guess just for fun. They're beautiful to watch for that very reason. They're incredible athletes. They can burst swim 35 miles an hour. They can dive as deep as 1,000 feet. They hunt in the dark by sound using a miraculous ability called echolocation. Let's take a look at the next slide. Thank you. So you have to ask yourself, why in this incredibly beautiful place called the Salish Sea? There's Mount Baker in the background, and Spock, one of the Cape Cod whales, that's a female, by the way, just doing her fantastic leap. You know, why is it that an animal that's been around for so long, 10,000 years, in this incredibly beautiful place, what's the problem? You know, why can't an animal that's the top predator gets its kill no matter what it is, anywhere in the world, whether it's a great white shark or a sea lion or a tuna, they can get it. And so what is the problem? Well, here in the Salish Sea, there are really three main challenges to the Southern residents. One is lack of adequate food, primarily Chinook, which is their favorite food. It's the biggest salmon in the sea, and the fattiest. They co-evolved with these Chinook back when it made sense to do that. They made these their favorite food choice. And by the way, this isn't some like irritating Southern resident thing. Why are they so fussy? Why don't they just learn to eat something else? People ask me that all the time. These animals eat what they know how to eat, and they catch it where they know how to catch it. And these are fishing traditions that are passed on generation to generation, just like fishermen everywhere, right? You don't just throw a hook in the water like randomly. No, you go to the good spots, and usually where you were taught by your parents or your grandparents. Same thing for them. They're taught at an early age. They're born as a blank slate, but they're taught at an early age what food is. What do you eat? Well, if you're a Southern or a Northern resident, you eat fish, primarily salmon, and in summer, almost entirely Chinook, which makes sense. It's a big fish. Furthermore, if you think back to when they evolved, and for many thousands of years, really up until about 50 years ago, these fish were very abundant, and they're available, unlike other salmon species. Think of sockeye, for instance, or pinks, year round and every year. You know, they're always out there on the outer coast, milling around someplace. And the Southern residents have an enormously large foraging range. They travel in their foraging all the way from BC to California, to the coastal realms right off of San Francisco Bay. So they've got a very, very large foraging range, and they can travel, and frequently do travel at least 50 miles a day in search of food. So what's the problem? The problem is that Chinook are in trouble almost everywhere throughout their foraging range. And so you have this sad tableau of an endangered species, depending on a threatened species, and even an endangered Chinook run for their survival. It's not hard to understand why that would be a problem. Secondly, noise. What a racket. You know, the oceans are so much noisier than they used to be. The Salish Sea used to be a silent realm. Well, add the ferries, add the shipping, add all of us zipping around in our sport boats. And a lot of people contacted me during COVID and said, oh, that must be great for the Southern residents. It's finally quiet for them. It's No, actually it was worse than ever because people couldn't, go to Disneyland or whatever they usually like to do. So everybody went out and got a boat. These animals, they have an ancient maritime culture. They live where they live, they hunt where they hunt. And if we are making noise in the very same place where they need to catch their fish by hearing a little tiny click bouncing off a salmon swim bladder, they're not going to do very well. Marla Holt is a magnificent scientist at Northwest Fisheries Science Center in Seattle, and she has studied the effect of noise, underwater noise, on hunting capacities of these whales. And she says, Lynda, think about it this way. Let's suppose I put you in a grocery store and I turn out all the lights and I take away half the food and you've only got a limited amount of time. And then I put a lot of stuff in your way while you're trying to shop. And I thought, oh, I get it. That's what it's like for them. There's less food than there used to be for them to catch. And it's harder to catch because the sound they need to hear is masked by all this underwater noise and also just disturbance at the surface. And study after study has shown us that especially the females will switch from feeding and hunting to traveling if they're interrupted with boat noise and vessel disturbance. So not enough Chinook, too much racket and pollution. These persistent pollutants that were banned years and years ago, like PCBs, they're still out there. Every time it rains, they're rinsing out of caulk and windows and old buildings, out of paint, one thing and another. And it's, running off the roads and it's going into Puget Sound and it makes its way into the fish. And these animals, you have to understand these three threats are intertwined. If they're not getting enough to eat, or it's too hard to catch what little there is to eat, then like us, they burn their fat, which is where all these pollutants are stored. So that increases the amount of toxins in their bloodstream. These toxins can interfere with their reproductive capacity, can suppress their immune defenses. So those are the three main threats that have been identified to date. And believe me, the search goes on. Scientists, this is among the most intensively studied animal in the world, and scientists are still working hard to figure out what is it that's limiting the recovery of these animals. We've been at it since 2005. They're not getting better, and in fact, we're still losing southern residents. We lost 2 more this year. Okay, let's see the next slide. This is the west side of San Juan Island. This is a place that has been an intensely important foraging ground for the southern residents since time out of mind. Why is that? Well, as I told you earlier, they don't just fish any place. They fish in a place where the tides, the bathymetry, natural features, and migratory patterns of fish really work for them. So why is it that we're really not seeing these southern residents on the west side of San Juan Island in the summer anymore? I mean, they used to be out there by May, and now we're lucky if we ever finally get to see them late into the summer. It's just nuts. I mean, we hardly ever see them out there anymore. And back when I was doing the field work for this book and for the paper, it was this big frantic problem. Would we even be able to get out and get pictures of southern residents? Would they be around? And that has only continued to become more and more true in recent years. Lately, the whales are seen much more frequently out there on the west end of the Strait of Juan de Fuca at Swiftsure Bank, and even out on the outer coast, even up on the west side of BC. Why is that? Well, they go where the food is, and the Fraser River has just been tanking. The Chinook runs there are in a very serious decline in recent years, and that's what the southern residents are there for. It's not to entertain us, it's to go get those big fat juicy Chinook that are returning to the Fraser in summer. That's why they're up there in the San Juan Islands. And so this beautiful scene of these animals there in the islands, more and more, that's something that people yearn for, but they don't get to see. And it's because they're following the fish, and they have to go where the fish are, and increasingly that's not here. Next slide. When we were starting our research on the southern residents at the newspaper for the Hostile Water series, we thought, well, here's what we'll do. What we should do is really try to do this like a scientist would and find a control group. Well, for us to understand what was going on with the southern residents, we thought, let's go north. Let's go see the northern residents. They're the exact same animal. They depend on salmon just like the southern residents, preferentially Chinook just like the southern residents, but unlike the southern residents, they're doing great. They've been increasing in population every single year since the capture era ended, and they've got plenty of young. So we thought, all right, let's see them and why that is. Next slide. And the funny thing is when we went up there, it was a reminder of what normal is like. I mentioned to you how hard it was to even have an opportunity to see the southern residents when we would go out with scientists like Deborah Giles at Wild Orca or the Center for Whale Research. It was a totally different story up north. We saw orcas every single day we went out, everywhere we went. We saw orcas like this one when we weren't even trying to. And they almost always had a little one alongside. And it made me realize, it was really kind of sad. It made me realize what we've gotten used to down here, where the southern residents are a rare sight, when really they should be they should be a common occurrence. We should see them all the time. Next slide. And in the San Juan Islands, as I mentioned, more and more what we see is each other zipping around in boats rather than the southern residents in the summer. Next slide. This is Paul Spong, and he's at Orca Lab, which is that collection of buildings you see on the rocks on Hansen Island there in the back. Paul Spong went out there in the 70s to create a research center to understand the northern residents. And what he's really interested in is their sounds, and they're trying to understand their language and document their presence by sound. And he has acoustic, he's got speakers underneath the water all over the place in the Johnstone Strait, and he's been gathering data for decades now about the northern residents. And next slide, please. Spending time with him on Hansen Island with a big tree like this right behind the lab, and the forest right behind the lab, this incredible old growth forest that Paul's walking in his slippers. You begin to realize the northern residents, they live not just in another place, they live in another world, a world a lot like what central Puget Sound and Puget Sound used to be like before settlement by the colonists. Next slide. Here we are out with some of the volunteers from Orca Lab looking out over the Johnstone Strait. It's not completely pristine. They get cruise ships going through there. So it's not like it's this, epically distant, silent water, but it's quieter. You don't have anything like the shipping noise that we've got down here in the Harrow Strait. All the shipping headed to the Port of Vancouver, one of the busiest on the West Coast, or of course, Seattle also. And all these container ships now just sitting out there parked, banging away, making noise, waiting for their chance to unload all their stuff. It's quieter water up there. It's also cleaner water. And they also have more choice of fish. Most of Washington's Puget Sound salmon, they turn right when they exit the Strait of Juan Islands and they head up to Alaska. Likewise, the fish coming out of the Columbia, a lot of them also turn right and head north. So the northern residents, they get the first crack at the fish up there. And they also have a wider selection of fish to feed on than the southern residents. The southern residents, their name tells you something. They live with us, right? They're not up there in the Broughton Archipelago in BC. No, they're down here with us in Vancouver and Seattle and even off the coast of San Francisco. They're dealing with like 6 million people in a vastly changed ecosystem. Next slide. So it was time to focus on that vastly changed ecosystem. So at the Seattle Times, the next place we really turned our attention was central Puget Sound. This is me, and I'm having a great day out with the southern residents. So I'm out with Brad Hansen from NOAA Fishery Science Center. And Brad, in the winter, when the orcas come back, they'll be back soon. I'm surprised they haven't already been back in central Puget Sound a lot. They start coming here now for the chum. The thing that Brad is paying attention to when they come here is, how do they look? He's doing a health survey, literally. Do they look fat? Do they look thin? Do they look healthy? Is everybody there? He and the Center for Whale Research do these population surveys to try to understand, have we lost any whales this year? Who's pregnant? Who's had a calf? And Brad was also sampling scat that day. You can get so much information from scat. You can find out whether the animals are getting enough to eat and where the fish come from. Deborah Giles with Wild Orcas has done an enormous amount of work on this as well. She actually uses a scat sniffing dog on the bow of her boat to pick up whale poo from a mile away from these animals. The dog has an incredibly sensitive nose and has been trained on the scat, and they can sniff it out. And she scoops it up and spins it down and, you know, centrifuge right there on the boat and takes the sample back to the lab. And what you can see in the scat is amazing. You can see whether the stress hormones are elevated in the whales due to lack of food. You can see, even with DNA analysis, where the salmon came from. And some of the work that Brad has published recently, Brad Hansen, shows us just how wide a range those southern resident orcas are taking fish from, all the way from the Taku River up in Alaska, all the way down to Central California. It's remarkable when you think about it. And it's a daunting challenge for us, because what it means is, you know, it's not enough to have one fish run that we recover in one place. That won't get it done. We have to have salmon runs available for these whales throughout their seasonal year, everywhere they go. That's not easy. And when you think about how depressed some of these salmon runs have been in what were the most magnificent salmon rivers the world has ever seen, the Columbia Snake System, 40% of the Chinook used to come out of the Snake Basin. Today, most of those Snake River spring, summer Chinook runs are among the most endangered in the Pacific Northwest. Similarly, the winter Chinook, unique in the world, the only winter Chinook run anywhere, used to go back to the Sacramento River. Those are critically endangered fish. NOAA keeps a list of so-called species in the spotlight. These are the most endangered animals that they protect. And guess who's on it? The southern residents and the winter Chinook. Well, that's not good. Next slide, please. So this is just a beautiful day, not far from the Edmonds Ferry Dock, for heaven's sakes. You know, this whale is taking a big old jump. And I think for me, one of the things that always strikes me every time I'm so lucky to get whale time with a scientist is it's the miracle that they're still here at all. Really? I mean, it's such a heavily developed shoreline here in central Puget Sound. We've heavily altered it. But I think that, you know, one of the things that makes me appreciate these animals is how adaptable they are and how brilliant they are. This is true for both the salmon and the orcas. And, you know, I promised you we were going to talk about solutions to this too. So I want to start getting into some of those suggestions. Next slide. One thing that we can do and we have done is protect them. And this was just a critically important move when we ended the capture era in this state in 1976. That was done by Washington state officials, all of them Republicans, by the way. The late Slade Gordon and Ralph Monroe, 7 times elected Secretary of State, and Dan Evans, the senator and governor, all got together and, you know, fought to end the capture era in Washington state. This was a critical life-saving moment for the southern residents, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act has also been critically important, not only for the southern residents, but for all marine mammals, which are in greater population today than in our parents' generation. There are more humpbacks, more gray whales, more dolphin, more white-sided dolphin, more sea lions, more seals, more marine mammals of every kind in the Salish Sea today. Why? Because we stopped killing them. It works every time. Why do I bring this up? I bring it up because I want to stress that when we make changes as a society at the governmental level, it works. These policies are paying off. We have more marine mammals today than we have had in generations. Puget Sound is actually cleaner today than it was in the 1950s because we built sewage treatment plants that are cleaning up the water, and we've stopped dumping slag right out of the Asarco treatment plant right into Puget Sound, or pulp from the pulp mill at Port Townsend. You know, these changes, each and every one of them, make a difference. And so we should feel encouraged that these policies, these changes, when we make them, they work. These are the teeth of Namu, the killer whale. He was the world's first ever performing killer whale, brought to the waterfront of Seattle by Ted Griffin. He was the one who started the whole capture craze by bringing Namu to Seattle. And you know what? He was welcomed as a hero when he did that. He was given a key to the city because people were so thrilled, so excited to see a killer whale up close. And, you know, as controversial as the capture era rightly became, it was through those captive whales that people began to understand for the first time what they were really like. And so this animal that had been reviled as some senseless killer came to be understood as incredibly intelligent, gentle, and maybe even inappropriately loved, like some kind of sea panda, you know? I mean, both are wrong. They're not some sea panda here for our entertainment, and they're not random ruthless killers. They have their own sovereign status in nature, and they are magnificent beings, and they have a right to be here. Next slide. This is a totem pole, actually, carved out of a single cedar log by Jewel James and his helpers at the House of Tears Carvers up at the Lummi Nation. And this totem pole was on its way all the way to Miami to try to make a statement to free Lolita, the last Southern resident, still in captivity down there. You know, they're still trying to free her, and then the Miami Aquarium keeps insisting she's better off where she is. You know, they don't want to give her up. She's a moneymaker for them. And I don't know how that's going to come out. There was a very critical federal report that was released over the last several weeks about how what she's been through lately with bad food and injury and so forth. A lot of those citations were subsequently corrected, but the fact remains she's alone in a tank in Miami. So, you know, these people came together to bless this pole. It went on its journey where the Lummi Nation couldn't get an audience at the Sea Aquarium. They just displayed the totem pole on the sidewalk across the street and played L-pod calls on a loudspeaker for Tokata. Next slide. So you want to know what the problem is? That's a river. Okay. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's the Green River. It's the Green River going through Tukwila and Seattle. And after that, it gets worse. It goes into the Duwamish. The Green flows into the Duwamish, which is Seattle's only river. Look, you can't treat a river like that and expect to have salmon, right? You just can't. You can't constrain it in levee walls and shave the trees down to broccoli and let it all heat up to 70 degrees and say, where are the salmon, right? What we have here now is the second largest warehouse district on the West Coast. And people have made a lot of money in this region, building Boeing and everything else we did, turning the Duwamish into a shipping channel. This is the problem. This is still home to Chinook, believe it or not. The Green River is actually an important salmon river. Next slide. But, you know, take a look. No trees, no shade. Imagine what temperatures are like on the west side of that bank around July 20th. Next slide. And it doesn't have to be like that. This is the middle green where King County and the King County Flood District spent the money to take out levee walls and also set levees back and do a lot of habitat restoration. So even where a river has been badly constrained and abused, change is possible. Rivers rebound, nature comes back. And this is the point that I want you to start thinking about as we think about the future. You know, this is unlike most other major problems. This is a case where we actually know what to do. It's not like world peace or getting people to take a vaccine or whatever the hell. I mean, this is as simple as cold, clean water running downhill, and you can count on it every time, and you can count on nature every time. We just need to do a whole lot more of these kinds of habitat fixes. Next slide. This is a little herring. I'm out on the Shimada, which is NOAA's premier research ship, one of them. And I went out on a research cruise on the outer coast for a week to be along with scientists who are trying to figure out what were the limiting factors for Chinook once they leave the Columbia River. Why are they tanking? Why don't they thrive? What's the problem? Well, it's the food chain, right? I mean, because of climate change, there's a lot of sea surface temperature changes, and that's affecting everything in the food chain that these animals depend on. Look, a little baby fish, it's got to get fat fast. Its job number one is to get bigger than a bird's beak really quickly, but then it's got 4 years at sea to get big and come back to its home river. And what do they eat once they get to be a little bigger? They eat this. They eat forage fish. They super need herring and sand lance. And, you know, these forage fish are critically important, and everyone forgets about them. But you know, there's this old Coast Salish saying, little fish make big fish, make black fish. It's all connected. And so these little forage fish like herring and sand lance and so forth, they need an intact near shore. They need eelgrass where they go and they hide and get away from predators, and they eat little tiny things off the blades of grass. They lay their eggs on eelgrass and other substrate. Forage fish like sand lance, they actually lay their eggs right up on the beach. And you'd never think that, like, what is a fish doing laying its eggs on the beach? But that's what happens at high tide. And if those eggs, you know, if they don't have a soft substrate to lay those eggs, you're not going to have any forage fish, which is why bulkheads matter, because they starve beaches, natural beaches, of that constant replenishment of sand coming down from the banks. That's why at Port Angeles, for instance, you know, you see this fantastic resurgence of life at the Elwha, because all that sediment that was locked up behind the dams has come down and rebuilt Washington's newest beach. And there's sand lance back in the near shore today. There are all kinds of herring in the near shore. There's a eulachon coming into the river for the first time. You've got more eagles than there have been in a generation eating all those glorious little eulachon. You've got bigger body size on the dippers, that aquatic songbird. Why? Because they eat coho eggs. You had 8,000 Chinook coming back to what was one of the most depressed salmon rivers anywhere in Washington after taking out 2 deadbeat dams. So change is possible, and nature comes back, and every little piece of it matters, whether it's something like this herring in my hand, or a eulachon, all these other forage fish that feed the salmon, that feed the orcas. Next slide. And, you know, if we give them a chance, there's just no question in my mind that these orca can not only persist, but rebuild in their numbers. These are very, very formidable animals. They're incredible athletes. They're amazingly smart. They have strong family systems. They know how to take care of one another. Here's Mother Orca with this little baby next to her. And can you see what's in the baby's mouth? It's a salmon. I mean, that little whale is so young, it's still nursing. So why is it carrying around a salmon? Well, maybe it's just like a teddy bear for that young animal, or maybe it's just learning how to be a big orca someday. There are 3 pregnant mothers to be in J-Pod right now. They're very, very pregnant. They could have their calves at any time. We've actually had 5 births in the last couple of years, which is fantastic news. You know, we started out talking about Mother Orca Tahlequah. Well, that was the first birth to the southern residents in 5 years. It's getting better. We are seeing more pregnancies. We've had the 5 births. All those babies are still alive. So, you know what, I want to leave you on a high note. We know what to do. We just need to do a lot more of it. We're in the hundreds of millions of dollar type habitat fixes now. So we really need a dedicated fund for salmon and orca to pay for this kind of work. There's so much sort of deadbeat hydro trash out there, stuff we built in the early 1900s that nobody even uses anymore. It just needs to be taken out. Enlow Dam, sitting on the Similkameen River, hasn't made kilowatts since 1952. Why is it there? Because the Okanagan PUD can't afford to take it down. Well, but we are making these kinds of changes everywhere. The Nooksack River, city of Bellingham had a water diversion there for 100 years. Well, they figured out it was going to be cheaper to get their water from the city of Snohomish than fix their water diversion. So you know what they did? They got $10 million from the Washington State Legislature, and more money from the Tulalip tribes, and professional help from American Rivers. And they put together a partnership with all these different entities, and they took it out. They blew it up in the summer, bang, gone. And you know what? There's Chinook coming back places they haven't been in a century. So we're doing this all over Washington, and the momentum is really building for fixes to the estuary, whether it's in the Nisqually or the Snohomish, or taking out old diversion structures and bulkheads like we did all along Des Moines. And the beach there has been restored to natural function. It's going on all over Puget Sound, all over Washington, and it's making a difference. Fish are coming back, forage fish are coming back, birds are coming back. It's a whole ecosystem recovery when we let nature do what nature does. So it's 4:15. I'm going to stop talking and take your questions. And I'm going to share my screen while Well, I just say one more little thing to you right before we get into questions. I'm going to try to show you a little bit of a little bit of a movie that I took while I was out with the Southern residents. And what I want to say to you while you watch this is, why do the Southern residents matter? Why should we bother? Because they're magnificent. They're unique. There are orcas in every ocean of the world, as I mentioned, but these are the only ones that come all the way into central Puget Sound, literally to the feet of skyscrapers in Seattle. And, when they do that, the whole city goes crazy. The ferries stop. People go out onto the beaches in West Seattle and on Juan Island and at Make-Way-Mooks Park, wherever they got any access to the water, to watch these families come home. And why wouldn't you? You hear that breath and it's a sound like something from the beginning of time. You watch them play, spy hopping or jumping. You watch them, take a fluke and bang it on the water. I don't know why, just for fun, I guess. You see them swimming upside down, sculling along. That beautiful winter light, they tend to come here in the wintertime. And you have to ask yourself, who else has got that? Downtown Orcas. And so let's marvel. Let's enjoy the wonder and the miracle of the fact that these animals are still with us right here in our local waters, and do everything that we can so that will always be so, to share these waters and share this home. And with that, I'll take your questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, we have some questions, and I'll start at the top. The first question is, way back from the beginning of your talk, do you think that humanizing whales helps guide our attention to realizing their complexity and to end placing them in captivity as if we own them?
Well, so captivities, it's illegal anymore to do that in Washington. SeaWorld has said they're not going to do it anymore either. They're not going to catch whales anymore. The ones that are still there are stuck there, but they're not going to breed them anymore either, like they used to. I don't humanize them. I do talk about their capacities. And I think it's actually a little bit, it would be, shall we say, degrading to humanize them. I mean, they do better than we do in so many ways. I mean, they should be our mentors. We could learn from them. They're way more successful. I mean, we've been around only 150,000 years. I'll be amazed if we make it at this rate. They've been around as a species for 6 million. So who's teaching who? Humanizing, I'd rather organize us, if that's a word. Whatever. Please go on.
And then the next question is there anywhere one might find info on potential projects for restoration?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay. Orca Recovery Day is tomorrow. If you actually just go to your browser and plug in Orca Recovery Day 2021, there are a zillion things to get in on. Tree planting and just so many things. Please do it. Bang, just go there and look, you'll see. Even if it wasn't Orca Recovery Day, I would tell you that one of the best things you can do if you love orcas is plant a tree, plant native plants, because that shades water, holds soil, cleans water, provides habitat. Every tree matters, every tree counts everywhere. And native plants matter because they feed the bugs, that feed the fish, that feed the whales. If you happen to be a waterfront owner and you have the capacity to take out any sort of hardening structures that are there, that would be good. So the beach can function. There's lots of assistance for that, either from Friends of the San Juans. They've got all kinds of information about how to live as a waterfront owner in concert with Puget Sound. There's so many things we can do. I would say that number one is learn about them. Read this book, read the newspapers, go to this exhibit, and get involved because it's really rewarding.
Okay. Different subject. What are the signs that an orca is pregnant, and what is the gestation period?
18 months. Wow. And they look really big. I mean, super big, just giant. You can't even imagine that they can swim, let alone breach, but they do. What's really, really, really cool is the images that are taken by drone photography by scientists John Durbin and Holly Fernbach. They pioneered this a couple of years ago, and now they do regular imaging of JK pods. And it's during this imaging that we almost always see pregnancies. There's always somebody pregnant. These animals are always in season, again, like us. But, you know, sadly, about 3/4 of these pregnancies have been lost lately. And it's due directly to nutrition stress. So, but that's how you know they look huge.
Okay. We're back onto rivers. As you look at the rivers that might be ripe for restoration, where would you put the priority for maximum impact in support of the resident orca population?
Oh, like where should we start? Is that the idea? Where's the top priority?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I will say it all counts because it does, but I would go where you can make the most impact. And, you know, that has to do with where do the orcas forage and what do they eat and where can you get the most recovery for the dollar. And I think in these places where you have structures where everyone agrees fish passage ought to be provided where it doesn't presently exist, so there's no big political fight, that ought to just like happen. I mean, the Green River is a great example. The Howard Hansen Dam has no fish passage, which means all the worst habitat, you saw pictures of some of it, that's where the fish are. They can't get up to all the good stuff, which is half the watershed. And you know, that's a Chinook River. So places like that, where nobody minds, there's no big fight, it just needs to get done. Those are the places where somebody needs to write a letter, namely all of you, to Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell and say, hey, please, 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 you know, put the money into getting fish passage built at the Howard Hansen Dam. Similarly, on the Similkameen, there's no fight over that. People are happy to do it. It just, they need to figure out the sediments and what to do with them and are they toxic and get her done. And it'll be expensive. It'll be a couple $100 million. Culverts everywhere, you know, take them out and especially pay attention to connecting the dots. You know, don't like make a stranded investment of a culvert that still has a lot of culverts above it, so you're not getting much, you know, action. You know, look at a watershed and look at the whole watershed and figure out where you can steer your dollars to get the stuff out of the way so the fish can do what they need to do. There are so many places where there's no disagreement politically over doing this work. It just takes money. All of these wonderful salmon enhancement groups all around the state, you know, they get together and they create these vetted lists of priority projects and they send them to the legislature. And every year they can do maybe 5. That's the problem. We're not spending enough money on this. But it's one of the most satisfying dollars you could spend. It's like education or public health. Every single time you do it, things get better.
So this is partly something you've answered, but Nan Evans wants to know what gives you the greatest hope for the future of the orca? What's your greatest worry? What one thing do you think we as individuals can do?
Honestly, awareness is number one. I mean, when we were traveling in California to do the stories for the Seattle Times and the book, here's what happened. So Steve and I spent this broiling day out of the Sacramento River with this poor biologist trying to save like the last 5 winter Chinook. And after spending this like 105-degree day, we go to this crummy restaurant near our hotel, walking across this broiling asphalt parking lot. We get in there and we have our little salad and about 5 glasses of water. And the waitress comes up and she takes my credit card. She says, oh, Seattle Times, what are you doing here? I said, oh, well, we're here doing a story about orca whales and Chinook salmon. She says, oh, well, I don't get cable, so I don't know anything about that. And I'm thinking, oh, that's really bad. You know, the Sacramento River used to be second only to the Columbia for salmon production. And people here by now don't even think about California as a salmon state. How sad is that? LPOD comes down to, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge like every year to try to catch salmon. L25, she's the eldest of all the southern residents. She's my totem animal. She was born in 1928. She's still out there trying to feed her family, depending on those California winter run fish. And that young lady didn't even know that there's salmon and orcas not far from where she was taking my credit card. So awareness. Here in Washington, we still care about salmon and we still think about every river and every stream as a salmon river and a salmon stream. And we still think of ourselves as salmon people. That's number one. If we ever lose that, it's over.
Okay, I'm going to keep going because there's a big long list here. Do you think reducing access to whale watching boats is helpful to the whales? I worry that it risks reducing people's attention on them and their plight over time.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we just changed the law in Washington just last year. So it's only 1 year into the doing, and we don't really have a lot of data on whether it helped. And plus, which the Southern residents are like barely here anymore. So they sort of solved this problem for themselves, truthfully. But we made changes. The first ever restrictions on whale watching in terms of how many boats can be out there at any one time watching Southern residents, how long they can spend, if there are any whales in the population that are pregnant or have a baby calf or just don't look very good, then they're supposed to stay even further back. So those are all really good changes. There are plenty of people who really wanted a total straight up ban, no Southern resident watching at all. And you have to ask yourself, I mean, how much of a difference would that really be for the industry since they're barely here anyway, and they've got all these other whales to watch, transients, chasing marine mammals. People love that. All kinds of gray whales, even humpbacks. So, maybe that'll be the next step. We'll see if the legislature wants to revisit that. I do think that time with the animals is really, really critical, even though you have to understand you have the ability to watch them from shore. We have the whale trail. That's another thing to look up online and check that out. It's a very comprehensive listing of beaches and trails and shorelines where you can watch whales. And that's, who gets that? I mean, how thrilling is it? Whale watching is super expensive, and the times that I've done it for the newspaper and paid my 150 or 75 or whatever it was, I don't remember, but all the other people on that boat were from somewhere else. They were tourists from around the world. I don't think there were any Washington people on those boats. They were all from somewhere else. Those of us who are lucky enough to live here, we can see them right from shore. So you've got options, is my point. I do think these, anything that gives people a chance to see these whales and understand them is a good thing. But honestly, the documentary films these days are so astonishing. They're even better than anything you'd see in anything you'd buy a ticket for out on a boat. And you can go to your marine science center.
Okay. So the next question is different subject. Do fish hatcheries have any role to play in feeding our resident orcas?
Oh, I love this question. I'm working on this right now for the paper. Look, sigh. I say sigh because, if hatcheries were the answer, we wouldn't have a problem, right? I mean, we've been cranking out hatchery fish in this state more than almost anyone in the world for 100 years. And still, we don't have enough out there for these southern resident orcas to eat. And you ask any fisherman, how many days of fishing are you getting? I mean, this is like pathetic, right? So honestly, you have rivers such as the Columbia where like more than 80% of the fish in that river today are hatchery fish, even 90%. So if you didn't have hatchery fish, you wouldn't have anything to catch. So this is tied directly not only to the orcas, but treaty rights. I mean, we're in a situation now where these wild fish runs are so depleted and the habitat that supports them is so limited and the climate is changing. It's all getting super urgent, right? Just cranking out more hatchery fish is not going to cut it. It's not. And it's interesting because we just put a lot of money into putting even more hatchery fish out there specifically for feeding the orcas. It's probably the biggest wild animal feeding effort ever cranked up anywhere in the world. Now, will any of those fish in 4 years wind up in an orca's mouth? Will they come back? I don't know. So, short answer, yes, hatcheries matter. And if you turned them off, you couldn't satisfy tribal treaty rights and you couldn't feed orcas. So that's not happening. And I'm not saying it should happen, but hatcheries are no substitute for wild fish and the productivity of the system that can support fish, whether they're hatchery or wild. So job one is habitat. You don't have that. I don't care if you raise them in trays or they do it themselves. It's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. So the next question, there are a couple of related questions here. Could we stop harvesting Chinook for a while? We love to eat salmon, but is there really such a thing as a sustainable harvesting where salmon are concerned? So
if you're concerned about orcas, don't eat Chinook. It's super simple. I can't afford them anyway, right? I mean, what are they, like 25 bucks a pound? Really? Is anybody even eating them? I can't. Whatever. Don't buy Chinook. Get something else. We have so many choices. Coho, sockeye, rockfish, delicious. I mean, we have so many choices. So just skip the Chinook. Just like leave it for the animals and hope that they get it. And in terms of, should we stop catching Chinook? Period. That's interesting. There is more and more of a call for that from scientists. People like Deborah Giles are calling for moratoriums on catching Chinook. Ralph Monroe, the former Secretary of State, he'd love to see that. I think the jury is out on whether if you chopped off all catching of Chinook everywhere, would that move the needle? Would that be enough? I mean, I think it's one more thing to try. But I care about the fishing industry too, honestly. I mean, you don't want everybody out there working with, a keyboard. And the fishing industry is part of our culture in this state, and it's part of who we are. And I hate to lose that. I don't know. I'll tell you this: we have cut down fishing more than anything else. Of all the different things that we've looked at, the classic 4-H's, habitat, hydro, hatcheries, harvest is the thing that we've hit the hardest. There's so little opportunity now. It's very teeny. And on the other hand, it is true that a lot of Washington Chinook are getting caught, not even here in Washington fisheries, but up in Alaska and BC. That's a federal change. That's a complicated fix through fishing treaties. And we've already made some reductions there. Maybe there should be more. But honestly, I think the big gas pedal is really about us. It's all of us who live here and how we're taking care of the landscape that takes care of the rivers, that takes care of the salmon. I know I keep harping on this habitat thing, but honestly, it is the biggest thing. As long as we keep cutting down the trees and paving the lowlands. Yeah. And we got to fix a lot of stuff. Right? Take out the hydro trash, all the stuff that's just like lying out there impeding the passage of salmon. There's a lot of it. And we just need money, and we know how to do it. We're better at it than anybody in the world. And there's a lot more coming. Klamath, 4 dams, 4 very large dams. That starts in 2023. That'll make a difference. 400 miles of salmon spawning habitat getting opened up on the Klamath River. Wow, that's big.
That is. And
yeah, we're going to see more and more of this, and we should see more and more of this. And each and every time we do something like that, it will make a difference.
So there's a question here about how optimistic you are about the dams on the lower, breaching the dams on the lower Snake River and gathering bipartisan support.
I'm laughing because I can't believe how much time I've spent on this in my career. It's just like, oh God. Honestly, I started covering this back when I was at the Spokesman Review in the 1990s. That's back when Judge Malcolm Marsh in Oregon, he came out with this like killer federal decision, right? He said, we must have a total overhaul on the Columbia River for the sake of salmon. And I just moved to the Northwest. It was like 1992. And I thought, oh, wow, this sounds serious. This sounds big. This is going to change everything. Little did I know there'd be like 5 more decisions just like that. And here we are, still status quo city. We've spent, I don't know, $17 billion on salmon recovery in the Columbia and Snake. And we've made a lot of changes. Those dams are the most sophisticated dams probably in the world for fish passage. You name it, we've tried it. But the problem is 8 dams is a lot of dams. And those fish are, these are the long distance runners. They do these 1,000-mile journeys. It's unbelievable what they do. And they're going back to these like desert river trickles in Idaho. I mean, this is not easy. And the rivers are warm and climate's cooking, and it's pretty darn desperate. And I look around and I watch this debate, as I have for now some embarrassingly long number of years. I'm like gray-haired by now, but it's different now than it's ever been. And it's different because of climate, and it's different because we've run through this process administratively and in the courts so many times without anything changing that I think a lot of people are ready for a political solution. It's like, could we please just stop talking about this and fix it? And there are a lot of even business interests like the irrigators who say, look, we don't care. We just want to farm. So if you could just like cut the check to extend our pipes and make our pumps run, we could keep farming. We're place-based. We can't do that anywhere else like we can do it here. You know, you're starting to hear more of those conversations, and I'm sure you've noticed recently Governor Inslee and Patty Murray saying they want to get a study done, and soon, like by next spring, summer, on what replacing the dams looks like. How do you replace the benefits? Those 4 dams: shipping, power. How do you do it? And that's very interesting to me. They've never done that before. And why are they doing that? They're doing it because they want to know, what does it take and what does it cost? And presumably that's because sometime before the midterms, they want to make a decision, call the question. And so it's a different debate today than it's ever been, no question. Things are changing, times are changing, the fish are almost out of time. The only thing different now is the orcas are going to. So it is a different time, and it's a different debate than I've ever seen it.
So we're kind of near the end of the questions. We're past 4 o'clock, but now there are just a whole lot of thank yous to you for your venturesome investigations and clear writing and lecturing. This is trees, plants, shade, fresh flowing water. I can't even read these as fast as people are putting them in here. So these are just all thank you to Lynda. And I'll go ahead and copy out the questions and pass them along so that if we miss anything, or you think of anything as a person in this audience today that you really were dying to ask that we didn't answer, please get in touch. But mostly I just wanted to thank you, Lynda, for doing this. Finally, my dream of 3 years has come true.
Mine too. I'm glad you did it.
So thank you very much. I wanted to remind people about the exhibit and where it's going next. And I know people follow Lynda wherever she goes, and then also coming up, we have another exhibit that Braided Rivers put together with Washington Environmental Council. We are Puget Sound, so be on the lookout for that. That'll be in our downtown space on Water Street in December. And other than that, I just want to thank you again for being part of our lecture series and being our inaugural speaker for this year's series, Lynda, and for all of the work that you do to help us understand the world that we live in and what we can do.
It's a pleasure, and I got to thank the Seattle Times, independently owned, locally owned for 125 years. That's really rare in American journalism. It's an honor to work there, and I'm so grateful to them for supporting this work. So yeah, go Seattle Times.
Yeah, yeah, we're lucky.
We are.
Okay, well, everybody go out and do good, and we'll see you back for another lecture, and we'll keep reading you, Lynda. Just keep writing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.